Hello, dear viewers. Before we begin this incredible journey together, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? What time is it in your part of the world? Drop a comment and let's connect across the globe. Whether you're having your morning coffee, enjoying an afternoon break, or settling in for the evening, we're all about to experience the same powerful story of survival and human resilience. This is a tale that will take you back to a time when winter could mean the difference between life and death, when families faced nature's fury with nothing but their courage and determination. So grab your favorite warm drink, get comfortable, and let's dive into the Winter Journals of Sarah Mitchell Dakota Territory, 1871-1872, October 15th, 1871. My dear readers, I write this by the trembling light of a tallow candle as the wind begins its autumn song outside our cabin walls. If you've found these pages, perhaps you're settling in for your own journey into the cold months ahead. I pray your hearth burns warmer than mine tonight, and your pantry holds more than our meagre stores. I should introduce myself properly. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I am chronicling what may be our family's last winter on this endless prairie. My husband Thomas and I came west 3 years ago with our children, young Mary, barely 8, and little Samuel, who's just turned 5. We believed the promises of green fields and rich soil, the homestead dreams that drew so many of us to this place where the horizon swallows the earth whole. Tonight, as I dip my pen in ink that threatens to freeze, I begin this journal not for glory or publication, but as a record. Should we not see spring, someone must know how we lived, how we tried, how we faced the thing that's coming. The prairie wind carries a smell tonight, metallic, sharp, like the edge of a blade. Thomas says it's snow still weeks away, but I know better. I've learned to read the signs in our 3 winters here. The grass has turned brittle gold. The few trees we can see from our window have shed their leaves like tears, and the cattle bunch together, sensing what approaches. You probably won't survive this. That's what the old-timers said when we arrived in spring, their faces lined with winters we couldn't yet imagine. Not unless you can find or make a place where the blizzards can't reach. At the time, their words seemed cruel, designed to frighten newcomers. Now I understand they were simply honest. But here we are, and here we'll stay. Thomas has spent every waking hour since harvest preparing our shelter, and I've filled every jar and sack I can manage. The children help as they're able, their small hands useful for gathering kindling and tending the animals. Even little Samuel knows the seriousness of what's ahead, though Mary still believes in the magic of snow, in the promise that winter might be beautiful rather than brutal. Our cabin stands now against the darkening sky, smoke curling from its chimney like a prayer. The walls are thick logs chinked with mud and moss, the roof slanted steep to shed what will come. It's not much to look at, rough-hewn and simple, but it's what we have built with our own hands, and it will have to be enough. I should prepare for bed. Tomorrow brings more work, always more work. But tonight, as I close this first entry, I feel the weight of what lies ahead pressing down like the heavy sky. Winter is coming, and we are small and fragile beneath its attention. May God keep us all. October 22nd, 1871. I write this morning by the pale light filtering through our paper-covered window, my breath visible in small puffs despite the fire burning steady in our stove. The first frost came 3 nights ago, silver and sharp across the prairie grass, and with it, Thomas's urgency has doubled. The work of building never ends. Yesterday, he and our neighbour Jacob Hartman raised the final logs for our cabin's walls, their axes ringing through the crisp air. I watched from where I tended the children, marvelling at how each timber must fit just so, notched and locked like puzzle pieces carved by hand. Samuel helped by carrying small sticks to our wood pile, his thin arms struggling with loads that would be nothing to an adult. But every piece matters now. Mary gathers prairie grass for kindling, tying it into bundles that smell of summer, even as winter breathes down our necks. Their laughter echoes oddly in the cold air, seeming too bright for the serious work we do. The cabin smells of fresh pine and hard labour. When I run my hand along a wall, the wood feels slightly warm, sap still sticky in places, resin sweet in my nostrils. There are gaps between the logs where wind will find us, but Thomas assures me we'll fill them before the true cold comes. I've saved every scrap of cloth, every handful of moss, every bit of clay the children and I can gather. Our neighbours, the Hartmans, live just a quarter-mile south. Yesterday evening Jacob brought news from town. Several families have abandoned their claims already, heading back east before winter traps them. The thought has crossed my mind more than once, especially when I watch Mary's breath fog in our unfinished cabin. But Thomas won't hear of it. This land is ours now, he says, bought with 3 years of labour and hope. We won't be driven off by weather. The historical accounts I've read since coming here speak of winter temperatures dropping below 20 degrees below zero. What seemed impossible to my Eastern mind now feels like approaching reality. Even seasoned farmers from Europe, the books say, found themselves shocked by the sheer power of prairie blizzards. What begins as gentle snowfall can within hours become a white wall that erases every landmark. I've been preparing our stores as best I can. The root cellar holds barrels of salted pork, sacks of cornmeal, jars of pickled vegetables from our garden. It's not much, certainly not enough for a family of 4 through a long winter, but it's what we have. I've dried apples until they're leathery and sweet, stored beans hard as pebbles, and saved every ounce of lard for cooking and lamplight. An interesting detail I learned from Mrs. Hartman. Some families pack treasured items they cannot bear to lose. She showed me a piano somehow hauled across hundreds of miles of wilderness, now sitting in their one-room cabin like a wooden altar. I asked her why they brought it, and she laughed, saying her husband claimed music could hold back any storm. I picture them on bitter nights, playing Beethoven while wind shrieks at their door, culture itself standing guard against chaos. Today, Thomas will finish the roof. The logs are ready, cut and shaped through weeks of dawn to dusk labour. I'll tend the fire and keep hot food ready for the men. This work makes enormous appetites. The children will help as they can, though mostly I'll try to keep them from underfoot while grown men heave timber overhead. I must close this entry. Mary is stirring and breakfast needs tending. But as I write these words, I feel the urgency Thomas carries in his shoulders, the knowledge that every log notched, every gap filled, every preparation made might mean the difference between survival and something I don't wish to name. The storm hasn't come yet, but we feel it waiting just beyond the horizon, patient as winter itself. November 3rd, 1871. Our cabin is finished. I write this with deep gratitude and equal measures of fear. The walls stand thick and true, chinked with mud and moss until no light shows through. The roof slopes steep above us, covered with split shingles Thomas shaped by hand. It's rough work, but solid, and when I lean against the logs they feel strong enough to hold back the world. This morning brought our first real snow. Not the dusting we've had, but thick flakes that fell steady and silent, coating the prairie in white. The children pressed their faces to our paper window, watching their familiar landscape disappear under a blanket that made everything new and strange. Samuel clapped when the first flakes hit our roof, but Mary grew quiet, perhaps understanding better what this meant. The work of chinking has consumed these past weeks. My hands are permanently stained with clay, my fingernails caked with moss and mud. Thomas and I work side by side, pressing handfuls of whatever we can gather into every crack and gap. The children help as they're able. Mary has become expert at mixing mud to the right consistency, while Samuel fetches moss from where it grows thick near the stream. One fascinating detail emerged from necessity. When we ran short of proper chinking materials, Thomas suggested we use old newspapers from town. We pasted them directly onto the inner walls, overlapping sheets until whole sections disappeared under print. Now our cabin walls tell stories, headlines about distant wars, advertisements for patent medicines, farming advice from agricultural papers. Mary practices her reading by following the lines of text, though the words blur together in the lamplight. The smell of our cabin has changed as the chinking dried. Gone is the sharp scent of fresh pine, replaced by the earthy smell of clay and grass, like a meadow brought indoors. When wind presses against the outer walls, I no longer feel that knife edge of cold at my ankles. The gaps are sealed, the draught stopped, our shelter finally worthy of the name. Yesterday something remarkable happened. Mrs. Hartman came calling with wonderful news. She'd had success with her winter garden. She showed me turnips she'd managed to grow late in the season, stored now in their root cellar. The vegetables were small and tough, but she claimed they'd saved her family during a terrible February 2 years ago. I've decided to try my own late planting if the ground doesn't freeze too hard. Our stove has become the heart of our home. Thomas hauled it from town by wagon, a black iron box that cost more than I like to remember, but which has already proven worth every penny. Before we had proper stoves, the books tell us, frontier families relied on open fireplaces that wasted fuel and sent most of their heat up the chimney. This iron box, with its door and pipe and flat cooking surface, lets us stretch every stick of wood. I'm learning to cook on its surface, balancing pots and pans on the flat top, adjusting heat by moving them closer or farther from the firebox. Bread bakes well on iron plates, beans simmer for hours in hanging pots, and bacon hisses as fat drips and smokes. The smell is rich and comforting, but also acrid. Everything takes on a taste of smoke that I'm growing used to. The children gather around the stove each evening, drawn not just by warmth, but by the sense of safety it provides. In its orange glow, our cabin feels almost cozy. Samuel has claimed a spot on a rag rug, where he builds small cities with sticks, while Mary reads aloud from the one book we own, her voice mixing with the gentle crackle of burning wood. But dangers lurk even in this comfort. Sparks leap from the firebox when resin catches, threatening our few quilts and the children's clothing. I've already found small burn holes in Mary's dress where she leaned too close. The smoke sometimes backs up when wind shifts, filling our cabin with haze that stings eyes and throats. We've learned to open the door briefly during such episodes, letting the bitter outside air clear our lungs. Nights have become a ritual of fire tending. Thomas wakes every few hours to feed the stove, stumbling through darkness to add logs from our pile inside. I hear him moving carefully, trying not to wake the children, and listen to the iron door creak open, the rush of air that makes flames roar briefly brighter. These midnight disturbances have become the rhythm of our lives. Our woodpile shrinks faster than I'd hoped. Each log burned is one fewer against the weeks ahead, and already Thomas talks of rationing heat, burning smaller fires, hoarding fuel for the worst storms. The thought of running short terrifies me more than cold itself. I've seen families reduced to burning furniture, books, even parts of their own cabins when wood ran out. Still tonight our stove glows warm and bright. The cabin smells of baking bread and wood smoke. The children sleep soundly under quilts that smell of wood shavings and hope. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, it always does. But for now we are warm, fed, and together under a roof that holds back the night. The winter hasn't truly begun, but already I understand what those old-timers meant. Survival here isn't victory, it's endurance. One day at a time, one night at a time, one stick of wood at a time. November the 18th, 1871. The first real blizzard found us last night. I write this morning with hands that still shake, not from cold alone, but from the memory of wind that screamed like something alive and furious. For 18 hours our cabin shook under nature's assault, and I learned what the word storm truly means on this prairie. It began at sunset yesterday. Thomas had gone to check the animals one final time, and I was preparing supper when the air outside suddenly went still. Not peaceful still, but ominous, as if the whole world held its breath. The children felt it too. Samuel stopped playing with his stick toys, and Mary looked up from mending her doll's dress. Even our dog Rex whined and pressed himself against the door. When Thomas returned, his face was grim. "Big one coming," he said simply, and began bringing in extra wood, armload after armload, until our cabin could barely hold it all. The wind struck just as full darkness fell, hitting our walls like a living thing determined to tear them down. All night the storm raged. Wind howled around our cabin with voices that seemed almost human, wailing, shrieking, moaning. Snow drove so hard against our walls that it sounded like sand being thrown by enormous hands. Our papered window rattled constantly, the greased covering flexing in and out like something breathing. The children huddled close to me under quilts, eyes wide every time the roof groaned overhead. I told them stories to distract from the noise, tales of brave princesses and magical kingdoms, but my own voice shook with each gust that seemed strong enough to lift our cabin and carry it away. Thomas spent the night checking walls and roof, finding small leaks where wind-driven snow found cracks in our chinking. We placed buckets to catch the worst drips, their steady plink, plink, plink adding to the storm's symphony. By morning, frost had formed on the inside of our walls despite the fire burning constantly. When dawn finally came, we could barely tell. The world outside had been erased, replaced by white nothing. Snow had drifted so high against our cabin that our door wouldn't open. We were trapped inside until Thomas could dig us out. The experience of waking to complete burial was more terrifying than I'd imagined. For a moment I panicked, feeling the walls close in, wondering if we'd been sealed in our own tomb. But Thomas remained calm. He worked at the door with a shovel, pushing until he'd cleared enough space for a narrow passage. When that first rush of bitter air flooded in, painful and sharp, we all gasped like people surfacing from deep water. The world revealed by daylight was transformed, sculpted into fantastic drifts and curves, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. The historical accounts speak truth about prairie blizzards. What looks like gentle snowfall can become a white wall within hours, erasing every landmark, every sense of direction. I understand now why travellers freeze to death mere yards from safety. lost in a world where up and down, north and south ceased to have meaning. Our livestock survived. Barely. Thomas had secured the cattle in our small barn, but even that sturdy building groaned under the wind. This morning, when he finally reached them, 2 of our chickens had frozen despite being inside. The surviving animals stood pressed together, their breath steaming, eyes wide with exhaustion from fighting fear all night. I'm grateful beyond words for the chinking we did. Without those careful layers of mud and moss, our cabin would have been uninhabitable. Even with them, frost formed on our quilts where breath condensed overnight. Water in our bucket skimmed with ice despite sitting near the stove. The line between outside and inside became dangerously thin. Today brought the work of recovery. Thomas spent hours digging paths to the barn and privy, creating narrow trenches through snow that came to his waist. The children helped by hauling snow in buckets, not to melt for water, but to pack against our cabin walls as extra insulation. The irony isn't lost on me. Using the storm's own weapon as protection against future storms, our food stores felt the impact. The storm lasted longer than expected, forcing us to use more wood, burn more oil, eat more of our precious supplies. I rationed carefully, but still our shelves look emptier than they should. If winter has only begun and we are already measuring meals, what will February bring? The sounds of our post-storm world are different. Wind still blows, but no longer with that furious voice. Snow crunches underfoot with a dry, crystalline sound that echoes strangely in the cold air. Our voices carry farther, clearer, as if the landscape has been scrubbed clean. Even our breathing sounds louder in the crisp air. Mrs. Hartman visited this afternoon, struggling through drifts to check on us. Her face was bright with relief when she saw our chimney smoking. They'd weathered the storm well, she reported, though they'd lost several roof shingles and would need repairs before the next blow. We shared coffee, precious, expensive coffee, and spoke in hushed tones about families who might not have fared as well. Tonight, as I write by candlelight, our cabin feels both stronger and more fragile than before. We've proven our walls can hold against nature's fury, but we've also felt how thin the margin truly is. The storm tested us and found us worthy, this time. But winter has many more tests ahead. The children sleep heavily tonight, exhausted by fear and excitement in equal measure. Thomas sits by the stove, whittling handles for tools broken in the storm's aftermath. Rex lies at my feet, still nervous, ears twitching at every sound outside. We are alive, warm, and together. For tonight that's victory enough. But I know now what we're truly facing. This wasn't the worst winter can offer. It was just the beginning. November 25th, 1871. Thanksgiving Day arrived grey and cold, though we celebrated with hearts fuller than our table. I write this evening by the light of our last good candle, grateful for small mercies that have sustained us through autumn's difficult weeks. Our celebration was modest but meaningful. Thomas managed to shoot a prairie chicken yesterday, our first fresh meat in over a week. I prepared it with the last of our stored onions and some wild herbs I'd dried in September. The children's excitement over this simple feast reminded me that luxury is relative to circumstance. We gathered around our small table, hands joined, voices raised in the traditional prayer of thanksgiving. But our gratitude felt different from previous years, deeper, more specific, more aware of how precarious our blessings truly are. We thanked God not just for food, but for walls that held, for fire that burned, for each other's presence in this vast, lonely land. The children took turns naming what they were thankful for. Mary mentioned our stove, our cabin, and surprisingly the mice that keep her entertained during long afternoons. Samuel declared himself grateful for snow, for sticks to play with, and for the stories we tell each evening. Their innocent perspectives reminded me to find joy in simple things. Thomas spoke quietly of his gratitude for neighbours like the Hartmans, for tools that hadn't broken despite hard use, for the strength to continue providing for his family. His voice carried the weight of responsibility he bears daily, but also the satisfaction of meeting each challenge as it comes. My own Thanksgiving felt complicated by worry for the months ahead. Yes, I'm grateful for what we have, but I'm also keenly aware of what we lack. Still, sitting in our warm cabin with my family safe around me, I felt blessed beyond measure. Many families have already abandoned their claims. Many others won't see spring. We remain, and that itself is cause for profound gratitude. The meal itself was simple: roasted prairie chicken, corn cakes made from our dwindling meal, and tea brewed from pine needles. No cranberries, no stuffing, no pie. Yet it tasted better than any fancy dinner we'd enjoyed back east. Hunger seasons appreciation like no spice can. After supper, Thomas surprised us by producing his fiddle for an impromptu concert. We sang hymns and folk songs, our voices echoing strangely in the small space. The children danced around the stove, their shadows leaping across the log walls. For a few hours, our cabin felt less like a survival shelter and more like a home. Mrs. Hartman stopped by in the afternoon bringing a small gift, a jar of wild plum preserves she'd been saving. We opened it immediately, spreading the sweet purple jam on corn cakes while children giggled with delight. Such small luxuries mean everything when comfort is scarce. The weather has turned colder since yesterday, with wind that cuts through our chinking in ways I hadn't noticed before. Thomas spent this morning resealing several gaps with fresh mud, but the cold seems more determined now, more aggressive in finding weaknesses in our defences. Our wood consumption has increased noticeably as temperatures drop. What seemed like an adequate supply now appears worryingly small. Thomas calculates constantly. Logs remaining, weeks until spring, warmth needed for survival. His mathematics always come out close, too close for comfort. The isolation weighs more heavily during holidays, when memories of extended family gatherings back east feel particularly sharp. I miss my mother's kitchen, my sister's laughter, the security of a community we'd known all our lives. Yet I'm also discovering that family can feel more precious when it's all you have. The children seem unaware of how precarious our situation truly is. Their games continue with undiminished enthusiasm. Their sleep remains peaceful. Their trust in our ability to care for them never wavers. This innocence is both blessing and burden. It keeps their spirits high while adding weight to our responsibility. Tonight, as winter's grip tightens around our small cabin, I'm grateful for this day of reflection and celebration. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new reasons to worry, new tests of our endurance. But today reminded us that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about preserving the human spirit that makes life worth living. The fire burns lower now, shadows growing longer on our walls. The children sleep peacefully under quilts that smell of wood smoke and hope. Thomas works quietly by the stove, preparing kindling for tomorrow's fire. And I write these words, preserving this day of Thanksgiving in a winter that will test our gratitude to its limits. We have much to fear in the months ahead, but we also have much to cherish. Tonight, that seems like enough. December the 1st, 1871, Today marks the first day of December, and with it comes the grim accounting of our situation. I write this as snow falls steadily outside, not the violent storm of weeks past, but the quiet, relentless accumulation that speaks of winter settling in for a long stay. Our woodpile has shrunk alarmingly. What seemed like an enormous store in autumn now looks pitifully small against the reality of constant feeding our stove. Thomas spends every clear day cutting and splitting, but the work grows harder as temperatures drop and snow deepens. Yesterday he returned from the woodlot with his beard white with frost, and his hands so numb he could barely hold the axe. The rhythm of our days has changed completely. We rise before dawn not by choice, but because the fire needs tending. Thomas stumbles through darkness to feed the stove while I prepare what breakfast our stores allow. The children wake to a cabin barely warm enough for breath to stop fogging, and we all huddle close to the iron heat source that means life itself. Mary has taken to naming our daily bread. Yesterday's ash cake became princess cake in her imagination, though it was nothing more than cornmeal and water cooked on the stove's flat surface. Samuel plays along, pretending his portion is a feast from magical kingdoms. Their ability to find joy in bleakness both breaks and mends my heart. I've learned to cook with desperation as my main ingredient. Beans simmer for hours in the same pot, stretched with melted snow when our water bucket freezes solid. Salt pork, precious and rationed, provides flavour more than substance. Every meal becomes an exercise in making little seem like much, in finding satisfaction where there should be none. The books I've read about frontier life speak of families turning to unusual expedients when food runs low. Yesterday I boiled strips of leather from an old harness Thomas couldn't repair. The result was tough and flavourless, but it filled space in our stomachs. Samuel chewed his portion dutifully, though I saw him wince. Mary asked why dinner tasted like boots, and I told her it was a pioneer recipe. Our cabin has developed its own ecosystem. Mice have discovered our warmth and food stores, multiplying rapidly in the space between walls. I hear them scurrying at night, bold enough to cross sleeping forms in search of crumbs. Rex stalks them constantly, but they're clever and numerous. One morning I found a mouse curled in my bonnet for warmth, a moment that made me laugh and shudder simultaneously. The cold seeps in despite our best efforts. Frost grows on the inside of our walls now, delicate crystalline gardens that sparkle in lamplight, but speak of failing defences. Our bucket of wash water froze solid 3 nights ago, despite sitting near the stove. I woke yesterday to find ice in the children's hair, where their breath had crystallized overnight. Thomas has begun sleeping in his clothes, rising every few hours to feed the fire. The constant interruption leaves us all exhausted, but the alternative, waking to dead embers and a frigid cabin, is unthinkable. I've learned to sleep lightly, listening for the sound of his boots on our dirt floor, the creak of the stove door, the rush of air that makes flames leap higher. Our paper window has become a source of fascination and anxiety. Frost forms elaborate patterns on its surface, beautiful but ominous. The greased covering flexes with each wind gust, translucent but never transparent. Our view of the outside world is reduced to blurred shapes and shifting light, making us feel more isolated than ever, a peculiar development. We've begun talking to ourselves and each other more, as if words themselves provide warmth. The children chatter constantly during daylight hours, telling elaborate stories to fill silence. Thomas and I discuss plans, repairs, hopes for spring, anything to keep conversation flowing. The alternative, sitting in quiet while wind howls outside, feels too much like surrendering to despair. The Hartmans visited 2 days ago, bringing unexpected gifts. A small bag of dried apples and news from other neighbours. The Weatherby family, newest to the area, had abandoned their claim after the big storm, loading their wagon and heading back to Kansas. The Andersons, veterans of 5 winters here, were confident but worried about their youngest child, who'd developed a persistent cough. Mrs. Hartman and I shared remedies and fears in equal measure. She showed me how to make pine needle tea, bitter but rich in substances that prevent scurvy. I demonstrated my technique for stretching flour with cornmeal, creating bread that's more substance than flavour, but fills bellies efficiently. We're becoming experts in survival, though neither of us expected such education when we came west. Our animals demand constant attention now. Thomas breaks ice on their water twice daily, feeds them hay we can't really spare, checks for frostbite on ears and tails. 2 more chickens died last week, simply froze despite being inside the barn. We ate them gratefully, though the meat was tough and strange tasting. The psychological challenges prove as difficult as physical ones. Samuel has nightmares about being buried in snow. Mary asks repeatedly when spring will come, and I don't have good answers. Thomas grows quieter each day, carrying worries he doesn't voice but which show in the lines around his eyes. I feel the weight of keeping spirits up, of pretending confidence I don't always feel, yet moments of unexpected joy still find us. Yesterday evening, Thomas produced his fiddle, I hadn't seen it in weeks, and played old songs while we gathered around the stove. The children clapped and sang, their voices mixing with wind outside in a strange but beautiful harmony. For an hour our cabin felt less like a fortress and more like a home. Tonight, snow continues falling. Not the violent storm that tested our walls, but the patient accumulation that speaks of winter's long patience. I watch flakes drift past our window and try to see beauty rather than threat. Spring will come. It always has, always will. Our task is simply to endure until it does. The children sleep heavily under quilts that smell of wood smoke and determination. Thomas whittles by the stove, creating small toys for Christmas still weeks away. Rex dreams fitfully, chasing mice even in sleep. And I write these words by candlelight, recording our small triumphs and quiet fears. We are not just surviving, we are living, loving, hoping. The storm may own the land outside, but inside these walls human warmth still glows. December the 20th, 1871, 5 days before Christmas, though you'd never know it from the world outside our cabin. I write this as the worst blizzard yet rages beyond our walls, having trapped us inside for 3 days now. Snow has drifted so high that our door is completely blocked, our window buried, our world reduced to the space contained within these log walls. The storm began on the 17th, building slowly from the north with that ominous stillness I've learned to dread. All day, the air felt heavy and expectant, like the moment before thunder breaks. The animals sensed it too. Our cow stood restlessly in the barn, our chickens huddled together, refusing to venture outside. Even Rex paced nervously between door and stove. By late afternoon, the first snowflakes began falling. Not the gentle drift of earlier snows, but hard, purposeful flakes that struck the ground with determination. Thomas emerged from checking the animals with worry etched deep in his face. "This one's different," he said, beginning immediately to haul extra wood inside. "We'll need every stick we can fit." The temperature dropped precipitously as darkness fell. I could feel it through our chinked walls, a coldness that seemed alive and hungry. By evening, wind was shrieking like something in pain, driving snow so hard it sounded like gunshots against our cabin. The very air outside became a weapon, hurling ice crystals with violence that made our walls shudder. For 2 nights and 3 days, we've been prisoners in our own home, sealed away from a world that's become actively hostile to human life. The storm's voice changed constantly, sometimes howling like wolves, sometimes screaming like demons, sometimes dropping to whispers that seemed more ominous than the loudest roar. Thomas attempted to dig us out yesterday morning, working with desperate energy to clear even a small passage. But the wind refilled his tunnel faster than he could clear it, pouring snow back into every inch of progress like sand through an hourglass. After 2 hours of futile effort, he returned exhausted and defeated, frost covering his eyebrows and beard until he looked like an old man. We're well and truly buried now, living in what feels more like a cave than a house. The children initially found this exciting. "We're bears in our den," Samuel announced, but as hours stretched into days, even their young spirits began to flag. The silence is profound when wind dies. No sound from outside penetrates our snow-wrapped walls. It's both comforting and terrifying to be so completely cut off from the world. The quality of light inside our cabin has changed completely. Our papered window, normally admitting at least grey daylight, now glows with an eerie blue-white luminescence filtered through layers of snow. Day and night blend together into a twilight existence where time loses meaning and the outside world ceases to exist. Our stove works overtime, consuming wood at an alarming rate, yet the cold seeps in through every crack and crevice. Ice forms on the inside of our walls despite constant fire, creating crystalline gardens of frost that would be beautiful if they weren't evidence of our failing defences. The children's breath creates clouds that freeze on their quilts, leaving tiny icicles that sparkle in the firelight. Most unsettling is the weight we feel pressing down from above. Snow doesn't simply cover our roof, it piles higher and higher until I imagine tons of it balance precariously over our heads. Every creak and groan of the roof beams becomes a potential catastrophe. Thomas checks the ceiling constantly, watching for signs of dangerous stress, ready to prop timbers if necessary. The psychological impact of complete burial affects us all differently. Samuel has grown clingy and quiet, rarely venturing more than arm's reach from my side. Mary maintains brave cheerfulness during daylight hours, but suffers nightmares that wake her whimpering in the dark. Thomas's jaw sets grimmer each day as he calculates our supplies against an indefinite confinement. Food rationing has become critical now that we can't supplement our stores with hunting or foraging. Every spoonful must be measured, every bite justified. I've begun watering down our thin soup even further, adding melted snow to stretch it into more servings. The children accept smaller portions without complaint, trusting that I know what's necessary for survival. Water presents constant challenges. We must melt snow for every drop we use, a process that consumes precious fuel and produces disappointingly small amounts of liquid. A full bucket of snow yields perhaps 2 cups of water, and the melting never seems to stop. Our entire cabin has become humid from constantly steaming pots, creating condensation that drips from every surface. The confined air grows thick and stale despite our best efforts at ventilation. Smoke from the stove has nowhere to escape efficiently, creating a haze that stings eyes and throats. We've learned to breathe shallowly during the worst episodes, opening the door briefly when wind permits to let fresh air rush in. These moments of bitter cold are almost welcome after hours of smoky stuffiness. Christmas preparations have taken on surreal quality in our buried cabin. Thomas carves small gifts by firelight while wind howls overhead. I've managed to save ingredients for one small cake, though whether we'll be free to celebrate by Christmas Day remains uncertain. The children draw pictures of Santa Claus arriving by tunnel rather than chimney, adapting their dreams to our underground reality. Our evening prayers have grown more fervent and specific. We pray not just for deliverance from the storm, but for the Hartman's safety, for travellers caught in the open, for livestock struggling in inadequate shelter. The weight of community responsibility feels heavier when we can't even check on our nearest neighbours. Sleep comes fitfully in our compressed world. We all lie together on our straw mattress, sharing heat and courage while the storm rages overhead. Dreams mix memory with claustrophobia. I find myself dreaming of open fields and blue skies, then waking to our dim, confined reality with disappointment that cuts like cold wind. Our supplies have reached a critical point. The cornmeal barrel shows bottom, the salt pork has dwindled to small pieces, and our dried beans rattle lonely in their sack. I've been rationing carefully, but 3 extra days of confinement have accelerated our consumption. Breakfast this morning was thin gruel flavoured with the last scraps of bacon fat. The children ate without complaint, but I saw the question in Mary's eyes. Water has become our most immediate concern. With no way to reach outside, we're melting snow that Thomas scrapes from around the doorframe. It's slow work. A full bucket of snow yields perhaps 2 cups of water. Every drop is precious now, used first for drinking, then for cooking, finally for the most basic washing. The psychological strain of confinement weighs heavily on us all. Samuel has grown clingy, rarely leaving my side, speaking in whispers as if loud voices might bring the storm inside. Mary tries to maintain cheer, but I catch her staring at the buried window with an expression too old for her 8 years. Thomas paces when he thinks I'm not watching, his fidgeting betraying worries he won't voice. We've turned to games and stories with desperate intensity. Yesterday we played every card game we know twice over, using dried beans as betting stakes. I've told every fairy tale I can remember, embellishing them with detail that would make their original authors laugh. Thomas has begun an epic saga about brave pioneers that continues each evening, with the children suggesting increasingly wild plot developments. The cold has found new ways to torment us. Despite our fire burning constantly, frost forms on the inside walls each night. Our breath creates clouds that dampen everything. Quilts, clothes, the few books we own. I wake some mornings to find ice crystals in my hair, frozen breath that accumulated overnight. The line between survival and surrender feels thinner with each passing hour. An odd discovery. The snow packed against our walls has actually improved our insulation. The cabin stays warmer than it did during our first storm, when wind could still find cracks to exploit. We've become hibernating animals in our earth den, conserved and contained until the storm passes. There's a strange comfort in this buried state, despite the obvious dangers. Our stove performs miracles of efficiency now that I've learned its temperament. A handful of kindling keeps the firebox glowing for hours. Larger logs burn slowly, providing steady heat rather than quick flames. I've mastered cooking on its surface. Bread that would have burned in September now emerges golden and even. Desperation has made me a better cook, though our ingredients would shame any civilized kitchen. Christmas approaches without traditional celebration. We have no gifts wrapped, No special foods prepared, no decorations beyond frost patterns on our walls. Yet yesterday, Thomas surprised the children by carving small wooden figures, a horse for Samuel, a doll for Mary. Their delight was so pure and genuine that tears froze on my cheeks before I could wipe them away. The children have adapted to our confined state with remarkable resilience. They've created elaborate imaginary worlds using sticks, stones, and scraps of cloth. Samuel's stick city now covers half our floor space, complete with roads, buildings, and citizens who speak in voices he provides. Mary has taught her wooden doll to read, using our one book as a primer. Their ability to find wonder in such circumstances humbles me daily. Mrs. Hartman must be worried about us. We were supposed to visit on the 18th before the storm struck. I hope she and Jacob are weathering this blow better than we are. The thought of neighbours struggling alone haunts me, but there's nothing to be done. The storm makes islands of us all, each family an isolated outpost in a sea of white hostility. I've begun rationing candles as well as food. We have perhaps a dozen left, and with no way to replenish them, each flame becomes precious. Evenings now begin in lamplight and end in near darkness, conserving illumination for essential tasks. The children have learned to find their way around our cabin by touch, navigating furniture and walls like blind sailors. Thomas continues his nightly fire tending, but I notice him moving more slowly, his energy sapped by constant vigilance. The physical demands of keeping us alive, chopping wood, melting snow, maintaining the fire, combined with the mental strain of our situation, are wearing him down. I try to help where I can, but so much depends on his strength and knowledge. Strange dreams have begun visiting my sleep. I dream of green grass, of flowers blooming, of windows that show blue sky instead of grey light filtering through snow. Sometimes I dream of our old home in Ohio, of markets filled with food, of stoves that burn without constant attention. I wake from these dreams disoriented, needing moments to remember where we are and why. Yet even in our extremity, human warmth persists. Last night, as wind screamed its worst, we all lay close together on our straw mattress, sharing heat and courage. The children's breath was sweet in the cold air, their small bodies trusting and warm against mine. Thomas's hand found mine in the darkness, his calloused fingers speaking of shared endurance. This morning brought a slight easing of the storm. Wind still blows, but with less fury. Snow continues falling, but I think I detect grey light where our window should be. Perhaps today or tomorrow, Thomas will be able to dig us free. Perhaps the worst has passed. Tonight, Christmas Eve, we'll gather around our stove and count our blessings. We have walls that hold, fire that burns, food that sustains, however meagre, and each other. Thomas will play carols on his fiddle, the children will sing, and I'll try to see beyond this storm to the spring that waits on the far side of winter. The storm rages still, but we rage back with song, story, and stubborn love. That has to be enough. January 10th, 1872. The new year found us deep in winter's grip, though we marked its passage quietly with the last of our dried apples baked into a small pie. I write this on a day so cold that the ink thickens as I form these words, and our cabin feels more like a fragile bubble of warmth in an ocean of ice. Christmas came and went with simple celebration. Thomas surprised us all on Christmas morning by producing small gifts he'd carved in secret during his late-night vigils. Wooden animals for the children, a simple but beautiful comb for me. The children gave us drawings made with charcoal from the stove, pictures of our cabin surrounded by flowers that exist only in their hopeful imaginations. We sang carols by the stove, our voices thin but determined in the cold air. The weather since Christmas has been brutally cold without the drama of storms. Day after day, the mercury in our thermometer, when it functions at all, registers temperatures I would never have believed possible. 20 below zero seems warm now compared to the mornings when our thermometer gives up entirely, the mercury frozen solid in its tube. Our morning routine has become a careful ritual of survival. Thomas rises first, padding across the floor in stocking feet to coax life back into the stove. I listen from under our quilts to the sounds of kindling catching, the iron door creaking, the subtle roar that means warmth is coming. Only then do the children and I emerge from our shared nest of blankets. Water management dominates our daily concerns. Every bucket, pot and cup in our cabin serves as a reservoir against the constantly freezing temperatures. We've learned to keep vessels near the stove, moving them closer when ice begins forming at the edges. The children have become expert at detecting the first signs of freezing, alerting me to move containers before they solidify completely. Our food situation has become truly desperate. The cornmeal barrel stands empty except for dust we scrape from its corners. Salt pork reduced to rind and fat, stretched into thin soups that warm but don't satisfy. I've begun grinding acorns gathered last fall, creating a bitter flour that makes bread possible if not pleasant. The children eat what I give them without complaint, though I see the hunger in their eyes. Thomas ventures out on any day the wind permits, hunting for game in a landscape that seems emptied of life. Yesterday he returned with a rabbit, and our celebration was genuine and heartfelt. I made it into stew that lasted 2 meals, using every scrap of meat and boiling the bones for broth. Such small victories feel enormous now. The isolation grows heavier with each passing day. We haven't seen the Hartmans since before Christmas, though their chimney smoke visible on clear days tells us they survive. The Andersons' cabin shows no smoke at all, and Thomas fears the worst but can't reach them through the drifts. Each family has become an island, connected to others only by the thin threads of distant smoke signals. Mary has begun teaching Samuel his letters using charcoal on the cabin walls. Our log surfaces now bear the alphabet, simple words, even small drawings. I should scold them for marking up our walls, but instead I find hope in these marks of learning and life. If we survive this winter, these charcoal lessons will remain as proof that education continued even in extremity. The children's games have grown more sophisticated as confinement continues. They've created an entire imaginary world inside our cabin, complete with elaborate storylines and complex characters. Samuel's stick figures have become citizens of a great kingdom where Mary rules as queen. Their play sessions can last for hours, their voices providing the only cheerful sounds in our small cold world. Sleep has become our refuge and our challenge. We all sleep together now, piled under every quilt and blanket we own, sharing body heat as our primary defense against cold that seeps through every barrier. The children nestle between Thomas and me, their small bodies warm and trusting. I often lie awake listening to their breathing, grateful for each peaceful exhale. Thomas has grown quieter as winter deepens. The constant responsibility of keeping us alive weighs on him heavily. I watch him calculating, wood remaining, food left, weeks until spring might arrive. His conclusions must be grim, though he keeps them to himself. Sometimes I catch him staring at the children with an expression that breaks my heart. Our candles are nearly gone. We burn only one each evening now, extinguishing it early to preserve what little light we have left. Soon we'll depend entirely on firelight, reading and writing by the stove's glow. Already my eyes strain to form these words in the shifting orange illumination. An unexpected blessing. Neighbours we barely knew appeared at our door 3 days ago. The Kowalski family, Polish immigrants with limited English, had been travelling when the cold snap trapped them. We shared our meagre resources without question, and they shared stories of their homeland's winters. Their presence has reminded us that survival sometimes depends on the kindness of strangers. The Kowalskis brought news from other homesteads. Several families have abandoned their claims, unable to endure the harsh conditions. Others have consolidated, multiple families sharing single cabins for warmth and resources. The settlement that seemed so promising in spring has been scattered by winter's relentless pressure. Mrs. Kowalski showed me a technique for making soap from wood ash and animal fat, creating something that cleans better than anything I've managed before. Her husband and Thomas have worked together to improve our chimney's drawer, reducing the smoke that sometimes fills our cabin. Small improvements, but ones that make our confined life more bearable. The cold affects everything now. Our iron stove contracts at night with sharp pinging sounds that wake the children. Wood splits with cracks like gunshots when Thomas brings it inside. Even our quilts grow stiff when moved away from the fire's influence. We live in a world where everything brittle, where the smallest mistake could prove catastrophic. Yet we adapt and endure. The children have learned to dress and undress quickly near the stove, minimizing exposure to cold air. I've mastered cooking with minimal fuel, creating meals that provide maximum warmth with minimum wood consumption. Thomas has become expert at reading weather signs, knowing when it's safe to venture outside and when we must simply wait. Tonight, as I finish this entry, snow begins falling again outside our buried window. Not the violent storm snow we've learned to fear, but the quiet, steady accumulation that speaks of winter's patient persistence. The fire burns low but steady. The children sleep peacefully, and Thomas carves quietly by the stove. We are still here, still alive, still hoping, still fighting against the cold and dark with whatever warmth we can create. Spring feels impossibly distant, but I know it waits beyond this frozen world. Our task is simply to last until it arrives. The night is cold, but our hearts are warm. February 14th, 1872. Valentine's Day in a frontier cabin brings no roses or chocolates. But Thomas surprised me this morning with a heart carved into the frost on our cabin wall. Below it, he'd scratched, "Is my dear Sarah," with his knife point. Such gestures mean more now than any store-bought gift ever could. The month of February has brought what I can only describe as a test of everything we've learned about survival. Day after day of bitter cold, punctuated by storms that seem designed to break our spirits as much as our walls. Yet somehow we continue. Our food stores have reached a point I never imagined facing. The last of our beans went into yesterday's soup. Today's breakfast was thin gruel made from flour swept from the corners of empty sacks, flavoured with nothing more than salt and hope. The children ate it gratefully, and their trust in my ability to provide breaks my heart daily. Thomas has begun talking about measures I pray we won't need to take. He's identified furniture that could be burned if our wood supply fails entirely. Yesterday, he showed me how to prepare leather for boiling, harness straps and old boots that might provide sustenance if game remains elusive. The thought of feeding such things to my children horrifies me, but desperate times may demand desperate choices. The Kowalski family departed last week when the weather briefly cleared, continuing their journey to relatives in Minnesota. Their leaving felt like losing family members we'd just discovered. Mr. Kowalski gave Thomas his spare axe before departing, saying spring wood cutting would require sharp tools. Mrs. Kowalski pressed a small jar of preserved plums into my hands. Treasure beyond measure in our current circumstances. Hunting has become Thomas's obsession and our salvation. He ventures out whenever conditions permit, following tracks in snow, setting snares near what little shelter remains for wildlife. 3 days ago he returned with a deer, our first substantial meat in weeks. The children danced around the cabin when they saw it, and I openly wept with relief. We'll eat well for several days, and I can make broth from the bones that will stretch even further. The psychological strain of winter shows in all of us now. Mary has grown quiet and thoughtful, spending long hours staring at our frost-covered window. Samuel clings to his stick toys with desperate intensity, creating increasingly elaborate stories where brave heroes always defeat winter monsters. Thomas's hands shake sometimes when he thinks I'm not watching, not from cold, but from the weight of responsibility he carries. My own mind wanders to dark places more often than I care to admit. I calculate constantly. Food remaining, wood left, weeks until spring might arrive. The arithmetic is grim no matter how I figure it. Yet somehow we continue finding ways to stretch what we have, to make little become enough for one more day. Sleep brings dreams that mix memory with longing. I dream of my mother's kitchen with its warm stove and well-stocked pantry. I dream of spring gardens full of green vegetables. Sometimes I dream of simply being warm, truly, completely warm, without effort or worry. I wake from these dreams feeling guilty for the luxury they represent. The physical toll of winter living becomes more apparent daily. We've all grown thinner, our clothes hanging loose, our faces sharp with hunger and cold. The children's energy comes in brief bursts followed by long periods of quiet rest. Thomas moves more carefully now, conserving strength for essential tasks. I feel hollow inside, not just from hunger, but from the constant vigilance required to keep us alive, yet moments of unexpected beauty still find us. Yesterday evening, frost patterns on our walls caught firelight in ways that created magical displays, crystalline gardens more elaborate than any artist could design. The children pointed out shapes and faces in the formations, laughing at the stories they invented about each frozen figure. Music remains our salvation when spirits flag lowest. Thomas's fiddle produces melodies that fill our cabin with warmth no fire can provide. The children sing along, their young voices mixing with the instrument's sweet tones. For those moments, winter feels distant, held at bay by human creativity and love. Our clothing has become layered and practical rather than pretty. We wear everything we own, adding and removing pieces as temperature fluctuates around the stove. The children look like small bundled dolls, wrapped in quilts and woolens that make them giggle at their own appearance. Cleanliness has become a luxury we can't afford, water too precious to waste, warmth too fleeting to risk exposure. A strange development. We've begun talking to our cabin as if it were alive. Hold strong tonight, Thomas murmurs to the walls during storms. Keep the wind out, I whisper to the chinking when drafts find new cracks. The children say goodnight to the stove before bed, thanking it for warmth. Perhaps we're going mad, or perhaps we're simply recognizing that our survival depends on these logs and clay and iron, holding together against forces that want to tear them apart. Word reached us yesterday through a traveller that other families in the territory have suffered terrible losses. The Weatherbys, who left in November, froze to death just miles from the nearest settlement. The Anderson children we worried about lost 2 fingers to frostbite but survived. Such news reminds us how fortunate we've been, how thin the line between endurance and tragedy. The traveller also brought newspapers from back east, their headlines about political scandals and social events seeming to come from another world entirely. What do congressional debates matter when your primary concern is keeping fire burning through the night? How can anyone care about fashion when staying alive requires every scrap of clothing you own? Our cabin has developed a complex ecosystem now. Mice remain numerous despite Rex's constant hunting. Spiders have found warm corners where they spin webs that catch condensation like tiny nets. Even a few insects persist, clinging to life in spaces near the stove. We've become a Noah's Ark of survival, each species finding its own way to endure. Tonight, February's end approaches with the promise of March ahead. Spring feels impossibly distant, but each day survived brings it one step closer. The children sleep peacefully under quilts that smell of wood smoke and determination. Thomas carves by firelight, creating small toys for better days ahead. And I write these words, recording our struggles and small victories against the endless cold. We are thinner than we were, quieter than we were, more careful than we ever imagined we could be. But we are alive together, unbroken by winter's assault. That has to be enough because it's all we have, and somehow it's proving to be enough indeed. Love, I've learned, is keeping the fire burning through the night. Love is sharing the last spoonful of soup. Love is carving hearts in frost on Valentine's Day when roses are impossible dreams. Love is not giving up when everything seems hopeless. And we have love in abundance, March 8th, 1872. Spring whispers its first tentative promises today, though winter maintains its grip with stubborn determination. I write this as snow melts in small, hesitant patches outside our cabin, the first we've seen of actual ground since November. The sight of brown earth, even in tiny glimpses, brings tears to my eyes. The children's excitement is infectious and heartbreaking. Mary pressed her face to our window this morning, watching water drip from our roof's edge. "Listen, Mother," she said. "The cabin is crying happy tears." Samuel has insisted we open our door several times today just to smell the air, which carries faint hints of earth and change beneath its icy bite. Our supplies have reached their absolute limit. Yesterday's meal was the last of our flour, stretched thin and cooked into flat cakes that barely deserved the name bread. Thomas returned from hunting empty-handed again. Game remains scarce in this white desert. Tonight's supper will be broth made from bones I've already boiled twice, flavoured with whatever wild herbs I can remember from autumn gathering. Yet hope grows stronger than hunger now. Each morning brings slightly more light, slightly less bitter cold. The howling winds that terrorized our nights have calmed to breezes that merely shake our walls instead of trying to tear them down. Small changes, but they accumulate like coins in a miser's purse. Thomas found the first sign of returning life yesterday, a set of rabbit tracks circling our cabin. Fresh tracks in new snow, evidence that wildlife is stirring after winter's long hiding. He set snares along the trail, and we pray tonight for success. Even a small rabbit would seem like feast after our recent meals. The Hartmans visited today for the first time since before Christmas. Jacob had to dig through drift still waist-deep to reach our door. but their appearance felt like a resurrection of community. They brought news from town. Several families didn't survive the winter, but others endured through cooperation and stubborn will. We shared information about wild edibles, hunting techniques, and methods for stretching food supplies that might help other survivors. Mrs. Hartman looked thinner than I remembered, but her eyes held the same fierce determination I see in my own mirror. We compared notes on improvised medicines, emergency foods, and ways to keep children's spirits alive during the darkest days. Her family survived on acorn flour and pine needle tea through February. Harsh fare, but enough to sustain life. The psychological effects of approaching spring manifest in unexpected ways. Thomas has begun talking about planting, what crops to try, where to expand our garden, how to improve our soil. Such planning seemed impossible during winter's worst days, but now it feels natural and necessary. Hope, I've discovered, is partly about believing in futures you can't yet see. Mary has started asking about school, when it might resume, what she's missed, whether her friends survived. Her hunger for learning and social contact reminds me that children need more than food and warmth to truly thrive. Samuel has begun saving small objects, pretty stones, interesting sticks, bits of coloured cloth, creating what he calls his spring treasure box. Our cabin bears the scars of winter's assault. Chinking has cracked and fallen out in places, leaving gaps that will need fresh clay and moss. The roof sags slightly under accumulated snow, requiring repairs before next winter. Our floor, packed earth worn smooth by months of confined living, needs fresh clay and proper drainage for spring rains. But these problems feel manageable now rather than insurmountable. Winter taught us skills we never knew we possessed: patience, resourcefulness, the ability to find joy in moments of simple survival. We've learned to make much from little, to stretch resources beyond their apparent limits, to support each other through extremity. The physical toll remains evident. We're all thinner, marked by months of careful rationing and hard work. The children seem frailer, though their energy returns a little more each day. Thomas moves with the careful precision of someone who's pushed his body to its limits and knows he must conserve strength for the challenges ahead. Yet there's something else in our faces now, a confidence born of tested endurance. We've faced winter at its worst and emerged intact, not unscathed, but unbroken. That knowledge changes how we see ourselves and our place on this harsh but beautiful prairie. Our relationship with the land has shifted too. Where once we saw endless opportunity, now we understand the price such opportunity demands. This prairie will always be dangerous, always demanding, always ready to test human determination against natural force. But it's also proven it can be survived, that human will and preparation can prevail against its worst moods. The animals sense change too. Rex has grown more alert, spending time at our door sniffing air that carries new scents. Our surviving livestock moves with greater energy, no longer simply enduring but beginning to anticipate. Even the mice in our walls seem more active, perhaps responding to subtle shifts in temperature and light. Food fantasies occupy our thoughts more vividly as hunger deepens. I dream of fresh bread, of vegetables from a summer garden, of milk still warm from the cow. The children talk about pancakes with syrup, about apples picked from trees, about meat that doesn't need to be rationed into tiny portions. Such dreams feel less like torture now, and more like promises. Tonight Thomas will play his fiddle and we'll sing songs of spring and hope, The children will add verses about flowers blooming and birds returning. Our voices, thin from hunger but rich with determination, will fill our small cabin with music that celebrates survival and anticipates renewal. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. It always does. We'll need to venture out more, seek fresh food sources, begin repairs and preparations for the year ahead. But tonight, we simply rest in the knowledge that we've endured the worst and lived to see its ending approach. The winter that tested us so severely has also taught us invaluable lessons about our own strength, about the power of family love, about the satisfaction that comes from meeting challenges with courage and ingenuity. We are not the same people who entered this cabin last autumn. We are harder, more resourceful, more grateful for simple blessings. December 31st, 1871, New Year's Eve. The last day of 1871 finds us deep in winter's embrace, counting hours until we can bid farewell to a year that tested us beyond anything we thought possible. I write this as snow falls steadily outside, each flake adding to the white prison that surrounds our cabin. Our New Year's Eve celebration will be quiet by necessity. We have no champagne, no party decorations, no crowd of friends to share midnight with. Yet there's something profound about marking time's passage when each day survived feels like a victory earned through struggle and determination. Thomas has been reflective today, speaking of the year's lessons in ways that reveal how much our ordeal has changed him. We came west as dreamers, he said this morning, watching snow accumulate on our window. We'll enter the new year as realists. There's wisdom in that transformation, even if it came at such a high price. The children have created their own celebration rituals. Mary spent the afternoon drawing pictures of next year's possibilities, gardens full of vegetables, animals healthy and fat, our cabin surrounded by flowers. Samuel built elaborate snow sculptures through the small opening Thomas maintains at our door, his imagination turning winter's burden into art. Food remains our constant concern. Today's inventory revealed stores lower than I'd hoped, perhaps 6 weeks of careful rationing remaining. Thomas's hunting success has been sporadic, dependent on weather that often keeps him confined indoors. We're living increasingly on hope and determination rather than substantial nutrition. Yet we've learned to make celebration from almost nothing. Tonight's feast will be pancakes made from our precious flour, sweetened with the last spoonful of molasses. The children consider this luxury beyond measure, and their excitement reminds me that joy can be manufactured from simple ingredients when stirred with love. The year's hardships have revealed strengths we never knew we possessed. Thomas has become expert at reading weather, managing resources, and finding game in seemingly lifeless landscape. I've learned to stretch food supplies beyond their apparent limits, create medicines from common plants, and maintain family morale through the darkest times. More importantly, we've discovered that our marriage can withstand pressure that would break weaker bonds. When you've shared hunger, cold, and genuine fear of death, ordinary marital disagreements seem trivial. We've learned to support each other through extremity, to communicate without words when words would waste precious energy. The children have grown in ways both wonderful and concerning. They're more independent, more practical, more aware of life's fragility than children should be. Yet they've also maintained innocence and hope that sometimes seems miraculous given our circumstances. Their resilience teaches me daily about the human capacity for adaptation. Our relationship with the land has evolved from romantic idealism to respectful realism. This prairie that once seemed like empty canvas waiting for our dreams now reveals itself as a powerful force that demands careful negotiation. We're learning to work with its rhythms rather than against them. The community bonds forged by shared hardship will outlast this winter, I believe. The Hartmans feel like family now. Other neighbours who've helped or received help have become part of an extended survival network. We've learned that frontier life requires cooperation as much as individual effort. Religious faith has simplified and deepened simultaneously. I pray less for abstract blessings and more for immediate needs: warmth, food, safety, strength to endure another day. God feels more present in daily survival than he ever did in Sunday sermons back east. As midnight approaches, we'll gather around our stove for prayers and quiet celebration. Thomas will play his fiddle if his fingers aren't too cold. The children will stay awake past their bedtime for this special occasion. We'll toast the new year with pine needle tea and hopes for better days ahead. The year ending brought us face to face with nature's power and our own limitations. The year beginning will test whether we've learned enough to not just survive but prosper in this demanding land. Either way, we'll face it together, strengthened by trials that might have broken us individually. Tonight, as 1871 dies and 1872 struggles to birth, I'm grateful for the hard lessons learned, the bonds strengthened, the character tested and found sufficient. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but it will also bring us one day closer to spring. The fire burns steady, the children sleep peacefully, and hope glows as constant as our iron stove. Whatever the new year holds, we'll meet it with courage earned through endurance and love proven stronger than winter's worst assault. May 1872 bring us safely to spring's blessed return. January 15th, 1872, 2 weeks into the new year, and winter has shown us depths of cold I never imagined possible. I write this huddled near our stove, my ink thick and reluctant, frost forming on the paper as I form these words. The thermometer reads 35 degrees below zero, temperatures that make the air itself feel solid. Our daily routine has become a careful choreography of survival. Thomas rises first each morning, padding barefoot across our frozen floor to coax life back into the stove. The sound of kindling catching, wood crackling, iron expanding with heat. These have become the soundtrack of hope renewed each dawn. The children wake slowly, reluctant to leave the warm nest we create by sleeping together under every quilt and blanket we own. Their breath forms small clouds even under the covers, testament to how completely the cold has invaded our supposedly secure shelter. Water management consumes enormous effort now. Every vessel in our cabin serves as reservoir against the constantly freezing temperatures. I've learned to detect the first film of ice forming on bucket surfaces, moving them closer to the stove before they freeze solid. The children help with this vigilant rotation of containers. Our food situation has become critical. The cornmeal barrel stands nearly empty, salt pork reduced to scraps and fat, dried beans rattling lonely in their sack. I stretch everything with snow water, creating thin soups that warm more than they nourish. Yet somehow we continue finding ways to make little become enough for one more day. Thomas ventures out whenever weather permits, hunting in a landscape that seems emptied of all life. He follows faint tracks in snow, sets snares near the few sheltered spots where wildlife might seek refuge. Yesterday brought success, a rabbit and 2 prairie birds that we celebrated like a feast from heaven. The psychological toll of confinement shows differently in each of us. Samuel has grown quieter, clinging close to my side, speaking in whispers, as if loud voices might summon the storm inside. Mary maintains brave cheerfulness during daylight, but suffers nightmares that wake her crying in the dark. Thomas carries responsibility heavily, calculating constantly, wood remaining, food left, weeks until weather might moderate. His conclusions must be grim, though he keeps them to himself. Sometimes I catch him staring at the children with expression that breaks my heart. Our cabin has developed complex survival strategies. We've learned to hang quilts strategically to trap warm air near the stove. Newspapers stuffed into cracks provide additional insulation. We move constantly between areas of relative warmth and bitter cold, timing our activities to conserve both heat and energy. The cold affects everything in ways we never anticipated. Our iron stove contracts at night with sharp pinging sounds that wake the children. Wood splits like gunshots when brought inside from the bitter air. Even our quilts grow stiff when moved away from the fire's direct influence. Yet we adapt with ingenuity born of necessity. The children have learned to dress and undress quickly near the stove, minimizing exposure to killing cold. I've mastered cooking with minimal fuel, creating meals that provide maximum warmth with minimum wood consumption. Thomas reads weather signs with accuracy that amazes me. Sleep has become both refuge and challenge. We pile together for warmth, sharing breath and body heat under layers of bedding that create a small pocket of survival. Yet even under covers, frost sometimes forms where breath condenses overnight. The line between life and death feels measured in degrees of warmth we can generate and conserve. The isolation grows more difficult as winter deepens. We haven't seen the Hartmans since before the big storm. Other neighbours' cabins show smoke on clear days, but reaching them through deep snow remains impossible. Each family has become an island, connected only by the thin hope that spring will restore community. Our entertainment has reduced to essentials, stories told and retold, songs sung around the stove, simple games played with sticks and stones. The children's imagination provides escape from our confined reality, creating elaborate worlds where brave heroes always triumph over winter monsters. Candles burn precious now, rationed carefully to extend our small supply. Most evenings find us working by firelight alone, our shadows dancing across log walls as flames flicker in the stove. Reading becomes a luxury reserved for special occasions when we can afford the oil for our lamp. The mirror shows faces changed by trial, thinner, marked by months of careful living, eyes that have seen extremity. Yet there's also strength in our features that wasn't there before, confidence born of tested endurance. We know now what we're capable of when circumstances demand everything we have. Tonight, as wind howls around our cabin with renewed fury, I'm grateful for small mercies that sustain us. We have walls that hold, fire that burns, each other's presence in this vast frozen world. Tomorrow will test us again, but we've learned that human will, properly applied, can survive nature's worst moods. The children sleep peacefully now, their trust in our protection never wavering despite evidence of how fragile our situation truly is. Thomas carves by firelight, creating small toys for better days ahead. And I write these words, recording our daily victory over forces that seem determined to defeat us. We are still here, still breathing, still hoping, still fighting for survival one frozen day at a time. February 1st, 1872. February arrives like a beast with teeth of ice and claws of wind, testing everything we've learned about endurance. I write this on the coldest day yet recorded. Our thermometer has given up entirely, the mercury frozen solid in its tube. The air outside would kill an exposed person in minutes. Our morning routine has become desperate efficiency. Thomas builds the fire back to life while the rest of us huddle under every covering we possess. The stove's iron surface frosts over despite constant burning, evidence of how completely winter has invaded our refuge. Food rationing has reached extremes I never imagined implementing. This morning's breakfast was thin gruel made from flour dust swept from empty sacks, seasoned with nothing but hope and determination. The children ate without complaint, their trust in my ability to provide both blessing and burden. Thomas has begun discussing measures that terrify me. He's identified furniture that could be burned if our wood runs out entirely. Yesterday, he showed me how to prepare leather for boiling, explaining that harness straps and old boots might provide nutrition if hunting fails completely. The thought of feeding such things to my children appalls me, yet desperation may demand desperate choices. The Kowalski family appeared at our door 2 days ago, half frozen from travel in impossible conditions. We shared our meagre resources without hesitation, though it strains our supplies to dangerous levels. Mrs. Kowalski taught me techniques for soap making from ash and fat that will help our cleanliness situation. Her husband worked with Thomas to improve our chimney's drawer. Hunting has become Thomas's obsession and our salvation. He tracks animals through snow so deep it comes to his chest, following signs invisible to untrained eyes. 3 days ago brought Triumph, a deer that provided our first substantial meat in weeks. The children's celebration was pure joy that brought tears to my eyes. The psychological strain manifests differently in each family member. Mary has grown contemplative beyond her years, spending hours staring at frost patterns on our window. Samuel creates increasingly elaborate fantasy worlds where brave children defeat winter monsters. Thomas's hands shake sometimes when he thinks no one is watching. Our cabin's ecosystem has evolved to include various survival strategies. Mice multiply in hidden spaces, bold enough to cross sleeping forms in search of crumbs. Rex hunts them constantly, but they remain numerous. Even spiders find warm corners where they spin webs that catch condensation like tiny fishing nets. The cold penetrates everything now. Ice forms on interior walls despite constant fire. Our washing water freezes solid within hours of heating. Breath creates clouds that dampen quilts, then freeze into tiny icicles. The boundary between outside and inside has become dangerously thin, yet we continue adapting with remarkable ingenuity. The children have learned survival skills that would amaze adults, detecting approaching frostbite, conserving body heat, rationing food voluntarily. I've mastered cooking techniques that extract maximum nutrition from minimum ingredients. Thomas predicts weather with accuracy that seems almost mystical. Sleep offers refuge and challenge simultaneously. We create warmth through shared body heat, but also share the constant anxiety of survival. Dreams mix memory with hunger. I find myself dreaming of my mother's abundant kitchen, then waking to our stark reality with disappointment that cuts like wind. The isolation has become profound as communication with neighbours becomes impossible. Smoke from distant chimneys provides our only evidence that other families survive, thin grey columns rising hopefully into bitter air. Yet each household remains trapped in its own small world of warmth and want. Entertainment reduces to absolute essentials. Voices raised in song, stories told by firelight, simple games that require no materials beyond imagination. The children's ability to find joy in such circumstances continues to amaze me. Their laughter provides warmth no fire can match. Our relationship with time has changed completely. Days blur together in repetitive cycles of feeding fire, preparing food, conserving heat, surviving darkness. Yet each dawn feels like victory, each sunset like accomplishment. We measure success in terms of making it through another night alive. The mirror reveals transformation in our faces, sharp cheekbones where flesh has melted away, eyes bright with hunger and determination, skin weathered by constant exposure to wood smoke and cold. Yet there's also strength in our features, confidence earned through tested endurance. Religious faith has evolved into something practical and immediate. Prayers focus on specific needs: warmth for the night, success in hunting, strength to continue caring for family. God feels present in daily survival rather than distant theological concepts. Tonight brings no promise of relief from the bitter assault. Wind screams around our cabin with renewed fury. Snow drives against walls that shake but hold. Yet inside, we create our own weather. Warmth from shared love, light from stubborn hope, sustenance from determination that refuses to surrender. The children sleep peacefully despite evidence of how precarious our situation has become. Thomas carves small figures by firelight, creating beauty in a world seemingly determined to destroy everything gentle, and I write these words, recording our struggle against forces that test the very limits of human endurance. February has arrived like Judgment Day, but we remain standing, thinner, hungrier, more careful than ever before, but alive, together, unbroken by winter's cruelest assault. We are still here, February 20th, 1872, 20 days into February, and this month has revealed winter's true malevolence. I write this by the light of our last precious candle, as wind outside sounds like devils shrieking for our souls. The cold has become a living thing, pressing against our walls with intelligence and malice. Our situation has deteriorated beyond what I thought survivable. The flour barrel stands empty except for dust we scrape with desperate fingers. Salt pork has been reduced to rind and fat stretched into broth so thin they're barely coloured water. Yet somehow we continue finding ways to make another day possible. Thomas returned yesterday with news that chills me more than any blizzard. He found the Anderson cabin buried completely under drifts, with no smoke rising from its chimney. Whether the family escaped or perished remains unknown, but their silence speaks ominously in a landscape where smoke means life. The children have grown quiet in ways that worry me deeply. Mary sits for hours watching frost patterns grow on our walls, her young mind perhaps understanding better than we'd like how desperate our circumstances have become. Samuel clings to increasingly elaborate fantasies where magical creatures bring food and warmth to deserving families. Our wood supply has reached crisis levels. Thomas calculates we have perhaps 10 days of fuel remaining if we burn conservatively, 15 if we ration heat to barely livable levels. Each log consumed feels like time itself burning away, bringing us closer to a cold that would kill us all. The psychological effects of extended starvation manifest in disturbing ways. I find myself obsessed with memories of food, my mother's Sunday dinners, fresh bread from the baker, milk still warm from the cow. These visions feel more real sometimes than our current stark reality, yet moments of unexpected grace still find us. Yesterday, Thomas surprised us with the small rabbit he'd snared near our cabin. The children's delight was so pure and genuine that tears froze on my cheeks before I could wipe them away. We made that single rabbit last 3 meals through careful rationing and creative use of every scrap. The Kowalski family departed last week when weather briefly moderated, continuing their journey to relatives in Minnesota. Their leaving felt like losing family members we'd just discovered. Mrs. Kowalski pressed her remaining jar of preserves into my hands before departure, treasure beyond measure in our current state. Our cabin has become a complex ecosystem of survival strategies. Quilts hang strategically to trap rising heat. Newspaper insulation blocks the worst drafts. We've learned to move constantly between warm spots near the stove and frigid areas where necessary tasks must be performed. Sleep offers little true rest now. Even under every covering we possess, cold seeps through until we wake shivering despite shared body heat. Dreams mix desperation with hope. I find myself dreaming of spring gardens, then waking to frost on our quilts with despair that tastes bitter as pine needle tea. The isolation has become absolute. No travellers pass our way in such conditions. No neighbours venture out for social visits. We exist in a world reduced to the space our stove can warm, surrounded by a universe of killing cold that stretches beyond imagination. Yet we discover reserves of strength we never knew we possessed. The children help with survival tasks beyond their years, detecting ice formation on water containers, rationing their own food voluntarily, maintaining hope when adults falter. Their resilience teaches me daily about human adaptability. Thomas has developed almost supernatural abilities to read weather signs and find game in seemingly lifeless landscape. Yesterday he returned with information about deer movement that led to successful hunting today. Such skills, learned through necessity, may mean the difference between life and death. Our evening entertainment has reduced to absolute essentials. Voices raised in prayer and song, stories told to distract from hunger, simple games that require no materials. Yet these moments of shared humanity provide warmth that no fire can match. The mirror shows faces marked by trial but not broken by it. We're thinner, sharper featured, marked by months of careful living. Yet there's also strength in our appearance, confidence born of surviving what seemed unsurvivable. We've learned what we're truly capable of when everything depends on our endurance. Tonight, February's assault continues with renewed fury. Snow drives against our walls like thrown sand. Wind shrieks around corners with voices that seem almost human. Yet inside our small refuge, human warmth persists against all odds. The children sleep peacefully despite obvious evidence of our desperate situation. Thomas works by firelight, creating small wooden toys for better days that may or may not come. And I write these words, preserving our story of survival against forces that seem determined to erase us entirely. 28 days remain until March arrives with its promise of change. Whether we'll survive to see that transformation remains uncertain. But tonight we're alive, together, refusing to surrender hope despite every reason for despair. We are still here, still fighting, still believing in spring's eventual return. March 15th, 1872. Spring whispers its first tentative promises today, though winter refuses to release its grip without a fight. I write this as our first patch of bare ground appears outside our cabin, brown earth that seems like miracle after months of endless white. The sight brought tears to my eyes. Our salvation came yesterday in the form of Thomas's most successful hunt yet. He returned with a deer that will feed us for days, plus 2 rabbits that feel like bounty beyond belief. The children's celebration was so joyful, it echoed across the awakening prairie like music. The sound of melting water dominates our world now, dripping from eaves, trickling along walls, pooling in depressions where snow surrenders to increasingly powerful sun. Our cabin sits in a growing island of revealed earth, muddy and glorious after months of sterile winter. Wildlife returns gradually but unmistakably. Mary spotted the first robin yesterday, its red breast brilliant against lingering snow patches. Thomas found fresh deer tracks leading to our creek, evidence that migration has begun. Even insects appear, tiny flies that seem miraculous after months of seeing no life outside our walls. The children's excitement is infectious and heartbreaking simultaneously. They press faces to our window, watching water drip from roof edges while exclaiming over each new sign of change. Samuel insists we open our door repeatedly just to smell air that carries hints of earth and possibility beneath its still bitter bite. Our food situation remains precarious but no longer desperately critical. Thomas's hunting success, combined with careful rationing of our remaining stores, means we'll likely survive until garden produce becomes available. I've begun planning this year's crops with hard-won wisdom about which varieties store well and resist early frost. The Hartmans visited yesterday for the first time since Christmas, struggling through drifts still waist-deep to reach our door. Their appearance felt like resurrection of community after months of isolation. They brought news from town. Several families didn't survive the winter, but others endured through determination and mutual aid. Mrs. Hartman looked thinner than I remembered, but her eyes held the same fierce determination I see in my own mirror. We compared notes on survival techniques, sharing information about wild edibles, hunting strategies, and methods for stretching food supplies that might help other families facing similar challenges. The psychological effects of approaching spring manifest in unexpected ways. Thomas has begun talking seriously about planting, which crops to try, where to expand our garden, how to improve soil that was neglected during our focus on mere survival. Such planning seemed impossible during winter's worst assault. Mary has started asking about school, when it might resume, what lessons she's missed, whether her friends survived the terrible season. Her hunger for learning and social contact reminds me that children need more than food and warmth to truly thrive in this demanding land. Our cabin bears obvious scars from winter's prolonged assault. Chinking has cracked and fallen out in numerous places, leaving gaps that will require fresh clay and moss. The roof sags noticeably under accumulated snow that still hasn't melted completely. Our floor, packed earth worn smooth by months of confined living, needs restoration. Yet these problems feel manageable now rather than insurmountable. Winter taught us skills we never knew we possessed. Patience beyond normal limits, resourcefulness that borders on miraculous, ability to find joy in moments of simple survival. We've learned to make much from little, to stretch resources beyond their apparent capacity. The physical toll remains evident in all of us. We're thinner, marked by months of careful rationing and hard work. The children seem frailer, though their energy returns incrementally each day. Thomas moves with precision of someone who's pushed his body to absolute limits and learned to conserve strength for essential tasks. Yet there's something else in our faces now. Confidence born of tested endurance. We've faced winter at its absolute worst and emerged intact. Not unscathed, certainly, but unbroken. That knowledge changes how we see ourselves and our place on this harsh but beautiful prairie. Our relationship with the land has shifted fundamentally. Where once we saw endless opportunity waiting to be claimed, now we understand the price such opportunity demands. This prairie will always be dangerous, always demanding, always ready to test human determination against natural force. The animals sense change as clearly as we do. Rex spends more time at our door, sniffing air that carries new scents. Our surviving livestock moves with greater energy, no longer simply enduring but beginning to anticipate better days. Even the mice in our walls seem more active, Tonight Thomas will play his fiddle and we'll sing songs of spring and hope. The children will add verses about flowers blooming and birds returning. Our voices, still thin from hunger but rich with determination, will fill our small cabin with music that celebrates survival. Spring whispers outside our walls, and we whisper back our profound gratitude for having lived to hear its gentle voice again. March 25th, 1872. Spring arrived officially this week, though you wouldn't know it from the snow still covering our land. Yet change is everywhere for those who know how to look. I write this by daylight that lasts past supper time, a miracle after months of early darkness. The sun, when it appears between clouds, carries actual warmth instead of mere light. Our salvation came 3 days ago in the form of Thomas's successful hunt. After weeks of empty-handed returns, he came home with 2 rabbits and a prairie grouse. The children's celebration was so joyful it brought tears to my eyes. We feasted that night like royalty, the rich meat restoring strength and hope in equal measure. The sound of melting water dominates our days now, dripping from eaves, trickling along walls, pooling in depressions where snow surrenders to sun. Our cabin sits in a growing island of brown earth, muddy and glorious after months of sterile white. The children wade through puddles, their laughter echoing across the awakening prairie. Wildlife returns gradually but noticeably. Yesterday Mary spotted the first robin of the year, its red breast bright against lingering snow patches. Thomas found deer tracks leading to our creek, evidence that larger game is moving again. Even insects have begun appearing. Tiny flies that seem miraculous after months of seeing no life outside our cabin. Our food situation remains precarious but no longer desperate. Thomas's hunting success combined with careful rationing means we'll likely survive until garden produce becomes available. I've begun planning this year's crops with lessons learned from last year's partial failure. Root vegetables that store well, grains that resist early frost, herbs that provide both nutrition and medicine. The Hartmans brought wonderful news yesterday. A supply wagon reached town last week, the first since November. Flour, salt, coffee, and other essentials are available for those with money or goods to trade. Thomas will venture to town as soon as roads become passable, trading our few remaining valuables for supplies to see us through until harvest. Mrs. Hartman and I have begun planning a community garden project. Several families will pool resources, sharing seeds, tools, and labour to create plots that serve everyone's needs. The cooperation forced by winter's isolation has created bonds that will strengthen our settlement. We've learned that survival depends as much on community as individual effort. The children show remarkable resilience as spring approaches. Their winter pallor gives way gradually to healthy colour as nutrition improves and outdoor activity becomes possible. Mary has resumed her lessons using charcoal and bark, determined to catch up on schoolwork missed during our isolation. Samuel has discovered the joy of mud, creating elaborate sculptures that dry in the warming air. Our cabin requires extensive repairs after winter's assault. Chinking needs replacement throughout, the roof shows several weak spots, and our door hangs crooked from months of ice formation. Thomas and I work together each day, addressing the most critical problems first. The work is satisfying after months of simple survival. We're building and improving rather than just enduring. Thomas has changed most visibly during our winter trial. The quiet man who brought us west has become someone harder, more decisive, more willing to take calculated risks. His skills as hunter, builder, and provider have developed tremendously. Winter taught him abilities he never knew he possessed, confidence born of tested competence. I've changed too, though perhaps less obviously. Months of managing our household under extreme conditions have given me knowledge I never expected to need. I can stretch food supplies far beyond their apparent limits, create medicines from common plants, maintain morale during the darkest times. These aren't skills I wanted to learn, but they've become part of who I am now. The prairie itself looks different to me now. Where once I saw beautiful emptiness, I now understand the complex ecosystem that sustains life here. I know which plants are edible, where game travels, how weather patterns develop. This land that seemed so foreign has become familiar through necessity and observation. Our relationship with neighbours has deepened through shared hardship. The Hartmans feel like family now rather than mere friends. We've seen each other at our worst and most vulnerable, creating bonds that go far beyond social politeness. The community that will rebuild this spring will be stronger for having survived together. Sleep comes more easily now that immediate survival no longer hangs in daily balance. The children rest peacefully, their small bodies relaxing as hunger eases and warmth increases. Thomas sleeps more deeply, though he still wakes sometimes to check the fire from habit formed during winter's worst nights. Dreams have begun featuring future plans rather than past comforts. I dream of gardens flourishing, of preserves lining shelves, of preparations that will make next winter easier. The children's dreams are full of outdoor adventures, of animals returning, of friends they'll see when travel becomes possible again. Our few remaining books have been read and reread until we know them by heart. Yet they've provided escape and education during our confinement. Mary can recite entire chapters of our Bible from memory. Samuel knows every fairy tale by heart and has begun creating his own variations. Literature became medicine for minds stressed by isolation and uncertainty. The emotional toll of winter shows in subtle ways. We're all quicker to appreciate small pleasures, a warm breeze, a glimpse of sun, a good meal. We're also more protective of each other, having learned how precious and fragile our family bond truly is. Love has been tested and proven stronger than we knew. Tonight we'll open our door wide for the first time in months, letting spring air flow through our cabin. The temperature won't yet support sleeping with windows open, but the symbolic gesture matters. We're no longer prisoners of weather, no longer completely dependent on our small fire for survival. Thomas brought his fiddle out yesterday evening and played on our small porch, the first music our prairie has heard since autumn. The melody carried across the awakening land, perhaps reaching other survivors, perhaps simply celebrating the return of possibility. Music sounds different in open air after months of confined acoustics. I've begun teaching the children about the wild edibles they'll encounter as we venture outside more. Which berries are safe, which roots provide nutrition, which plants can be brewed into beneficial teas. Knowledge that could save lives if we're ever again reduced to foraging for survival. The mirror shows faces changed by winter's passage. Thinner, marked by hardship, but also somehow stronger. We bear the scars of survival, chapped skin, permanent lines around eyes, hands roughened by constant work. But we also carry the confidence of people who faced the worst and endured. Tomorrow, Thomas will attempt the journey to town, our first real venture beyond our immediate area since November. The roads remain poor and weather uncertain, but supplies are necessary and the trip has become possible. His return will mark another milestone in our journey back to normal life. Spring whispers louder each day, promising renewal, growth, and hope. The winter that nearly broke us has instead strengthened us, teaching lessons about resilience, love, and the surprising depths of human determination. We are survivors now, tested and proven. The storm has passed, and we remain standing. April 10th, 1872, final entry. Today marks the true end of winter and the beginning of our recovery. I write this final entry in my winter journal as green shoots emerge from the thawing earth, and hope blooms as surely as the wildflowers that will soon paint our prairie with colour. Thomas returned from town yesterday with supplies that seem luxurious after months of scarcity. Real flour, white and fine, coffee beans that fill our cabin with rich aroma, salt pork and dried goods that will ease our transition back to normal living. But more valuable than any purchase was the news he brought of other families' survival and the community's determination to rebuild stronger than before. The supply wagon driver told Thomas our winter was among the worst in 20 years. Temperatures reached 40 below zero in January. Several blizzards exceeded anything in recorded memory. These facts should appall me, but instead I feel pride. We survived weather that defeated families with more experience and better preparation. Our endurance wasn't luck, it was choice, determination, and love working together against impossible odds. Our garden planning consumes daylight hours now. I've sketched plots for vegetables that store well, potatoes, turnips, carrots, onions. Thomas has identified areas for grain crops that will supplement our winter food supply. The children help by clearing rocks and debris from plots they've claimed for their own small gardens. Their enthusiasm for growing things touches me deeply. Mary has resumed her formal education with Mrs. Hartman, who's established a temporary school in her cabin. The hunger for learning after months of limited instruction shows in every child's eager participation. Samuel demonstrates reading skills that amaze adults who remember his complete illiteracy last autumn. Hardship, it seems, can accelerate growth in unexpected ways. The community meeting held last Sunday revealed how winter changed all of us. Families spoke openly about struggles, failures, and techniques that meant survival. We're planning cooperative projects that will strengthen everyone. Shared root cellars, community wood gathering, coordinated hunting expeditions. Winter taught us that individual preparation isn't enough. We need each other. Our cabin repairs progress steadily as weather permits outdoor work. Fresh chinking seals gaps that leaked heat all winter. A new roof section will shed water properly when spring rains arrive. Thomas has improved our stove's ventilation, reducing the smoke that plagued us during the coldest months. Each improvement makes our home more comfortable and secure. The psychological healing proceeds more slowly than physical recovery. The children still sleep fitfully sometimes, dreams troubled by memories of hunger and cold. Thomas occasionally wakes at night to check the fire from habit formed during winter's demands. I find myself hoarding food automatically, unable to trust that abundance will continue. Yet joy returns incrementally. Mary's laughter sounds genuinely carefree again. Samuel plays outside without constantly looking toward our cabin for reassurance. Thomas whistles while working, a sound I hadn't realized I'd missed until it returned. We're remembering how to live rather than merely survive. The prairie reveals its spring beauty gradually, like secrets shared with trusted friends. Grass pushes through snow patches, impossibly green against white remnants. Wildflowers bloom in protected spots, splashes of colour that seem miraculous after months of monochrome winter. Birds return daily, their songs replacing wind's howl as our soundtrack. Our livestock survived better than expected. The cattle, though thin, show no lasting damage from their winter confinement. Our remaining chickens have begun laying again, providing fresh eggs that taste like heaven after months of stored foods. Even Rex has regained his playful spirit, chasing rabbits he couldn't catch through snow just weeks ago. The social aspects of recovery prove as important as physical restoration. Neighbours visit regularly now, sharing news, comparing experiences, planning cooperative ventures. The isolation that nearly drove us mad has given way to community bonds stronger than any we'd known before. Shared hardship created relationships that will endure. Mrs. Hartman and I have begun planning a harvest celebration for next autumn, a gathering that will commemorate survival and prepare mentally for another winter. We'll share techniques learned through necessity, foods preserved through innovation, and stories that transform suffering into wisdom. Such gatherings may become traditions that strengthen future generations. The children's games now incorporate winter survival themes. They build snow forts that represent frontier cabins, create elaborate scenarios where toys survive blizzards, practice skills they learned during our confinement. Play has become a way of processing trauma and celebrating endurance simultaneously. Thomas speaks openly now about next winter's preparations. We'll build a larger root cellar, establish better drainage around our cabin, and improve our wood storage capacity. Experience has taught us where our defences proved weak and how to strengthen them. Next winter will still be challenging, but it won't find us unprepared. I've begun preserving this winter's lessons in more permanent form. Letters to my sister describe techniques for stretching food supplies. Detailed notes record which wild plants proved edible and nutritious. Thomas sketches improved cabin designs that incorporate lessons learned through bitter experience. Knowledge gained through hardship shouldn't be lost to time. The mirror now shows faces marked by change but not broken by hardship. We're thinner still, scarred by months of careful living, but there's strength in our features that wasn't there before. Winter tested our character and found it sufficient. We know now what we're capable of when circumstances demand everything we have. Our marriage has deepened through shared trial. Thomas and I have seen each other at our absolute worst and most vulnerable, yet our bond has strengthened rather than fractured. Love that survives hunger, cold, and desperation together has proven itself against anything life might offer. We're partners in survival as well as life. The children have grown in ways I couldn't have imagined. Mary shows responsibility and resilience that would impress adults. Samuel demonstrates courage and adaptability remarkable in someone so young. Winter forced early maturity on them, but also gave them confidence in their own capabilities that will serve them throughout life. Religious faith has shifted rather than disappeared. I'm less concerned now with theological questions and more focused on practical expressions of divine grace. The blessing of family love, the miracle of shared survival, the daily gifts of food, warmth, and hope. God, I've learned, is present in ordinary moments of extraordinary difficulty. Plans for future improvements occupy our conversations now. Thomas wants to dig a proper well closer to our cabin. I'm planning expanded garden space and better food preservation facilities. The children dream of pets they'll raise and adventures they'll have when weather permits free movement again. Spring cleaning has become a celebration of renewal. We've opened windows long sealed against winter air. Fresh breezes blow through rooms that smelled of smoke and confinement for months. Quilts hang on lines to air out, and floors receive their first proper washing since autumn. Our cabin breathes again. The prairie stretches before us now not as a threatening emptiness, but as home ground we've learned to read and understand. This land tested us severely and found us worthy of remaining. We've earned our place here through endurance, adaptation, and stubborn refusal to surrender hope. Tonight, I'll close this journal and place it with our few precious books. Someday, perhaps, our children will read these words and understand what their parents faced together. Or perhaps other pioneers will find encouragement in our story of survival against odds that seemed impossible. The fire burns low in our stove now, but no longer from necessity. Outside, spring air carries the promise of summer warmth. Inside, our family rests secure in knowledge that we've faced winter's worst and emerged stronger than before. We are no longer the naive family that arrived here 3 years ago. We are survivors, tested and proven, ready for whatever challenges await. Winter taught us that human will, properly applied, can overcome nature's worst moods. Love, we learned, is stronger than hunger, warmer than fire, more enduring than the longest storm. The children sleep peacefully tonight, their dreams full of spring adventures rather than winter fears. Thomas plans tomorrow's work while carving small tokens of celebration. And I write these final words by candlelight that represents choice rather than necessity. Winter has ended, spring has begun, and we remain. Together, alive, unbroken, grateful. The storm has passed, and we are still here to greet the dawn. End of winter. Journal Sarah Mitchell. Survivors of the winter of 1871-1872, Dakota Territory. April 25, 1872, additional reflections. 3 weeks have passed since I closed what I thought would be my final entry. But I find myself returning to these pages with additional thoughts that demand recording. The transition from winter survival to spring renewal continues to reveal lessons worth preserving. The psychological adjustment to abundance proves more difficult than expected. Yesterday, Thomas returned from town with enough flour to last months, yet I found myself measuring it out as carefully as during our worst scarcity. The children hoard small treats, hiding pieces of candy as if famine might return tomorrow. We've learned caution so thoroughly that prosperity feels unsafe. Mrs. Hartman and I spent yesterday afternoon discussing what she calls survival guilt, the uncomfortable feeling that comes from having endured when others didn't. The Weatherby family's fate haunts us both. They were good people, careful and prepared, yet luck and circumstance conspired against them. Their tragedy reminds us how narrow the margin between life and death truly was. The community meeting held last week revealed fascinating details about other families' survival strategies. The Kowalskis, who briefly shared our cabin, survived by building what they called a human burrow, a dugout home carved directly into a hillside. The Andersons created an ingenious system of underground tunnels connecting their cabin to barn, allowing animal care during the worst storms. Most intriguing was the story shared by old Henrik, the Norwegian bachelor who lives alone 5 miles north. He demonstrated a technique for creating ice houses, structures built entirely from blocks of frozen snow, complete with doorways and ventilation systems. Inside these frozen homes, he maintained temperatures warm enough for survival using nothing more than candles and body heat. Our own innovations during the worst periods now seem almost miraculous in retrospect. The newspaper insulation that saved us from drafts, the leather soup that sustained us during hunger, the shared warmth that kept us alive during February's worst nights. These desperate measures succeeded beyond our wildest hopes. Necessity truly did become the mother of invention. The children continue processing their winter experience through play and conversation. Samuel has begun drawing pictures of our cabin surrounded by giant snowdrifts, always including smoke coming from the chimney to show we were alive inside. Mary writes stories about brave pioneer families conquering winter monsters, her narratives mixing memory with fantasy in ways that seem to help her understand what we endured. Thomas has become something of a local expert on winter survival, consulted by newer settlers planning their preparations. He's begun sketching improved cabin designs that incorporate lessons learned through bitter experience. His drawings show underground storage areas, better ventilation systems, and ingenious methods for conserving heat that might help future families avoid our near disasters. The physical scars of winter fade slowly. My hands, cracked and roughened by months of harsh work, are gradually softening. The children's hollow cheeks fill out as nutrition improves. Thomas's persistent cough, acquired during long hours in cold air, finally seems to be easing. Our bodies heal, but the memories of extremity remain sharp and clear. Religious faith has evolved rather than simply deepened through our trial. I'm less interested now in theological abstractions and more focused on practical expressions of divine presence. The miracle of shared survival, the blessing of family love tested and proven, the daily gifts of food and warmth, these have become my primary evidence of God's active care for human beings. Our relationship with the land itself has fundamentally changed. This prairie that once seemed like empty space waiting to be filled now reveals itself as a complex ecosystem with its own rules and rhythms. We've learned to read weather signs, to understand seasonal patterns, to work with natural forces rather than against them. Respect has replaced naive confidence. The economic impact of our winter ordeal will last for years. Resources consumed during survival must be replaced through increased production and careful saving. Thomas estimates it will take 3 growing seasons to rebuild our reserves to pre-winter levels. Yet this burden feels manageable now that we know what we're capable of enduring. Plans for next winter already occupy our thinking. Thomas wants to dig a proper root cellar carved into the hillside behind our cabin. I'm planning an expanded garden with emphasis on root vegetables that store well. The children suggest improvements to our wood storage and better windows for their play area. Preparation has become a year-round mindset rather than a seasonal activity. The social bonds forged during winter's worst moments continue strengthening our small community. Neighbours who shared resources and information during crisis now cooperate on spring projects with unprecedented enthusiasm. The isolation that nearly broke our spirits has given way to interdependence that enriches our daily lives. Letters from relatives back east arrive regularly now that mail service has resumed. Their concerns about our welfare, their difficulty understanding why we remain in such a harsh environment, their offers of refuge in civilized places, all seem to come from another world. We've become different people than the ones who left comfortable lives to chase Western dreams. I've begun corresponding with other frontier women, sharing techniques for food preservation, home medicine, and family morale during difficult times. These exchanges reveal that our experience, while extreme, was part of a larger pattern of adaptation, occurring throughout the Western territories. We're participants in a vast experiment in human resilience. The mirror now shows faces that have seen extremity and survived. Lines around our eyes speak of worry and laughter both. Our hands bear permanent calluses from work that city dwellers never imagine. Our bodies carry scars and strengths acquired through necessity. We look like people who belong to this land because we've paid its price. Dreams continue featuring winter imagery, but the tone has changed. Instead of nightmares about cold and hunger, I dream of cozy cabins with fires burning bright, of families gathered around tables laden with food, of communities where everyone survives because everyone helps. Winter has become memory rather than threat. Mary announced yesterday that she wants to become a teacher specifically to help frontier children learn skills they'll need for survival. Samuel speaks of becoming a doctor to help families like ours during medical emergencies. Winter's lessons have shaped their life ambitions in ways I never could have anticipated. The final snow melted last week, revealing a landscape both familiar and transformed. Our cabin sits on a slight rise that becomes more noticeable without white covering everything. Spring flowers bloom where we remember only frozen wasteland. The prairie shows its beauty now that we've proven worthy of witnessing it. Thomas brought his fiddle outside yesterday evening and played while sitting on our cabin's small porch. The music carried across the awakening land, perhaps reaching other survivors, perhaps simply celebrating our family's successful passage through winter's trial. The melodies sounded different in open air after months of confined acoustics. As I closed this supplementary entry, I realized that winter's gift wasn't just survival, but transformation. We entered those cold months as hopeful but naive settlers. We emerged as proven homesteaders with knowledge, skills, and confidence that will serve us for lifetime. The trial that nearly broke us instead made us stronger than we knew we could become. Tonight, the children will sleep soundly with windows open to spring breezes. Thomas will rest peacefully without waking to tend the fire, and I will dream of gardens flourishing, of preserves lining shelves, of next winter's challenges met with hard-won wisdom. We are not the same family that faced winter's approach with anxious hearts. We are survivors, tested and proven, ready for whatever challenges await in this land that has become truly home. The storm has passed completely now, and we have emerged from winter's crucible refined like gold. May 15th, 1872. 1 year later, reflections. Writing these final thoughts on the anniversary of our great test, I'm struck by how profoundly winter changed not just our circumstances, but our very understanding of what it means to be human. A full year has passed since we emerged from that isolated cabin, and the lessons continue revealing themselves in unexpected ways. Our cabin has been expanded and improved, but we've kept the original room exactly as it was during those terrible months. The children insist on eating breakfast there occasionally, as if remembering and honouring the space that sheltered us. The newspaper chinking remains visible on one wall, its headlines about forgotten political scandals now seeming like artifacts from another civilization. The garden flourishes beyond our wildest dreams. Root vegetables fill underground storage areas that Thomas engineered based on winter's harsh teachings. Preserves line shelves built specifically to hold a year's worth of food. Never again will we face winter unprepared for its demands. Yet abundance doesn't diminish our appreciation for simple sustenance. Mary has indeed begun teaching neighbourhood children, creating informal lessons that blend traditional subjects with practical frontier skills. She shows them which plants are edible, how to read weather signs, ways to conserve warmth and resources. Her curriculum would astonish educators in eastern cities, but it perfectly serves the needs of young people growing up, where survival skills matter more than social graces. Samuel demonstrates remarkable aptitude for healing arts, treating injured animals and helping neighbours with minor ailments. The winter when he learned to endure pain and scarcity apparently taught him empathy for suffering that will serve him well if he pursues medical training. Children, it seems, learn resilience more readily than adults, adapting to hardship with remarkable grace. Thomas has become unofficial advisor to new settlers, sharing hard-won knowledge about winter preparation and survival strategies. His reputation for practical wisdom draws visitors from considerable distances. The quiet man who brought us west has become a leader whose experience speaks with authority that can't be questioned. Our marriage has reached depths of trust and partnership that peaceful times never could have created. When you've seen your spouse at their absolute limit, hungry, exhausted, frightened, yet still caring for family, romantic love transforms into something stronger and more reliable. We know now that our bond can withstand anything life offers. The community that emerged from winter's trial continues strengthening with each passing season. Shared hardship created relationships based on genuine mutual dependence rather than mere social convenience. We help each other not from obligation, but from knowledge that survival often depends on cooperation that transcends individual families. Correspondence with relatives back east reveals how completely our perspective has changed. Their concerns about fashion, social status, and material accumulation seem almost incomprehensible to people who've learned to find satisfaction in basic survival. We've discovered that happiness correlates more closely with security and family bonds than with worldly success. The prairie itself has revealed secrets that only long residence and careful observation can provide. We know now where wildlife shelters during storms, which plants indicate underground water, how seasonal patterns create opportunities for gathering and hunting. This knowledge, accumulated through necessity, makes us true inhabitants rather than merely residents. Religious faith has evolved into something more practical and less theoretical than what we brought from our former life. Prayer now focuses on gratitude for daily blessings rather than requests for distant rewards. God's presence manifests in ordinary miracles, successful harvests, family health, neighbors' kindness, rather than dramatic interventions. The economic foundation of our homestead has solidified through diversification learned during scarcity. Multiple crops reduce the risk of total failure. Preserved foods create security against supply interruptions. Improved livestock management ensures protein sources during emergencies. Winter taught us that single points of failure could prove catastrophic. Plans for future winters reflect accumulated wisdom rather than naive hope. 3 years' worth of firewood now stands cut and stacked. Food storage capacity exceeds any possible need. Clothing and bedding sufficient for Arctic conditions fills our improved cabin. We prepare not from fear but from respect for natural forces that demand serious preparation. The psychological resilience developed during extremity continues serving us in lesser challenges. Problems that once seemed overwhelming now appear manageable when compared to winter's life-threatening demands. Financial difficulties, social conflicts, even health concerns feel surmountable to people who've faced genuine survival challenges. Children born to other families since that terrible winter seem different from their older siblings, more independent, more practical, more serious about responsibilities. The community itself has been shaped by shared trial in ways that will influence generations. Character forged in extreme circumstances creates cultural foundations that peacetime societies rarely achieve. Our cabin stands today as monument to human determination triumphing over natural hostility. Visitors often comment on its solid construction, not knowing that every log, every chink, every board represents desperate preparation for trial by winter. The building itself tells our story of survival through careful planning and stubborn refusal to surrender. The children's nightmares have finally ended, replaced by dreams of adventure and possibility. Their confidence in their own capabilities, earned through real contribution to family survival, serves them well in all endeavours. They approach challenges with optimism tempered by realistic assessment of difficulties. As I write these final words, spring advances toward another summer of growth and preparation. Next winter will come, it always does, but we'll meet it with knowledge, resources, and community support that transform challenge into routine management. The terror has been replaced by competent preparation. This journal, begun in anxiety and completed in triumph, will remain as testament to one family's successful navigation of extreme trial. Perhaps other families facing similar challenges will find encouragement in our story. Perhaps historians will someday use such records to understand how ordinary people adapted to extraordinary circumstances. The storm that tested us so severely has become the foundation of our strength. Winter will never again find us unprepared or uncertain. We've learned that human beings, properly supported by love and determination, can endure anything nature offers. That knowledge changes everything about how we see ourselves and our place in this vast, demanding, beautiful land. The children sleep peacefully tonight, their dreams full of summer adventures rather than winter fears. Thomas plans tomorrow's work while carving gifts for their upcoming birthdays. And I write these words by lamplight that represents choice rather than necessity. We are no longer the uncertain family that faced winter with anxious hearts. We are proven homesteaders, tested by extremity and found sufficient. The prairie has accepted us as permanent residents worthy of its harsh beauty. We belong here now, not as visitors but as natives of this demanding but rewarding land. The storm has passed completely, and we remain to tell its story. Editor's note: this journal was discovered in 1923 when the old Mitchell homestead was demolished. The family successfully farmed the land for 37 years. Sarah and Thomas raised 4 children to adulthood. Mary became a teacher, Samuel a doctor. The cabin described in these pages was eventually replaced by a larger home, but its foundation stones still mark the spot where one family proved that human will could triumph over nature's severest test. The Mitchell homestead became a stopping point for later settlers, who received practical advice and emergency shelter from the family, whose survival during the winter of 1871-1872 became legendary throughout Dakota Territory. Their story inspired countless others to persevere through their own trials, proving that survival strategies learned through extremity could be passed down to strengthen entire communities. This journal stands as one of the most complete first-hand accounts of frontier winter survival, providing historians with invaluable insight into the daily realities faced by pioneer families. The techniques and attitudes described in these pages influenced federal policies regarding homestead preparation and community support systems that helped thousands of later settlers survive their own winter trials.